Sorry. All right. Thank you. How was lunch? We all good? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Excellent. What's the word? You pretty much like ate everything, which was excellent. Did not want to see waste there. All right, up next, we do have a panel, and for this one, I'm going to hand over all of my responsibilities on stage to Aaron Hodder, one of our founders.
Oh, and thanks, everyone. Handing over all responsibility to me is the first mistake Prey has made today. So a little bit about me. So I'm Aaron Hodder. I'm the Wellington Practice Manager for Datacom Testing Services. However, more pertinently, I'm also a co-director of NZ Tech Rally, and I'm so pleased and so privileged to be able to work with Cami and Prey. So in tech, we talk a lot about tech. Funny that, right? But as Alan mentioned earlier, that actually, software development is a socio-technical process. It involves technology and it involves social structures. Yet we rarely talk about these social structures. And ultimately, when you think about it, in terms of the physical stuff we do, we all pretty much probably have identical days in that, okay, if you imagine when we used to go to the office, how would the day look where you go in, you go and grab a coffee, you sit down, you open Outlook, you look at emails, you check Teams, and then maybe at 9 o'clock or 9:30, you stand up around a whiteboard and you say, oh yeah, yesterday I did this and I'm blocked on this issue, so I'm talking to the infrastructure team and blah, 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 blah. And then you go and sit down and open Jira and have a look at a ticket. We actually do the same stuff. I often, when I'm getting off the train in the morning, all I think about is all of us are going to go in and log into Excel in about half an hour. And it really depresses me. But it's so weird. So why is it that even though we all kind of do the same stuff, for some people, they have a joyous experience at work, and for some people, it's a woeful experience at work. Some people are doing things that are meaningful, and some people are doing things that are tedious. So that kind of thing fascinates me. And so the goal of this panel is to talk about and understand, okay, what is culture? What impact does it have on the work that we do? Beyond the tools and technology, what actually has the actual impact of what we do, and how might we influence it? And speaking of influencing, I mean both at our workplace level, how do we influence it amongst our peers, but also we seem to import so much culture. How does Spotify do it? The Agile Manifesto, written by a bunch of Americans. People talk about, that Google deployed this many times a day, so we should do. Well, what about our own stories? What's something that we can export to the world in terms of tech culture? If you have any questions as we go along, there's a URL here. If you see me checking my phone, panellists, it's not because I'm bored and am checking Twitter. Then again, who is checking Twitter nowadays anyway?
It's Threads, yeah, it's Threads now.
But instead, I'm looking at questions, so I may take questions throughout the panel. So the people that I most wanted to talk about in this subject are these three fine folk here today. So Don is the co-founder and director of Catalyst, New Zealand's largest open source service provider. And Don was my first boss in tech. Now, you remember Alicia talked about the culture at Catalyst, and it was, the people there are passionate and opinionated. This was my first job in tech, so anyone who knows me knows why maybe I'm also passionate and opinionated. That culture that I got as a little baby tech worker, I still carry with me today. So of course, had to have Don to talk about culture. Rachel, as soon as the topic, I think maybe our very first post on LinkedIn, suddenly Rachel came in and goes, oh my gosh, I want to talk, or I want to be involved in some way. This topic is my thing. I met her and she just talked about this thing and she was telling me in this book and this book and this study and just citing all these resources. So it's like, oh my gosh, we need to talk about this with Rachel. And Rahul, he works with me first of all, Rachel is also the VP of Engineering at Kogo. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention and Rahul works with me at Datacom. And has over 20 years experience working in 8 countries. And whenever I talk to Rahul at work, it's just he just says all these really wise and sage things. So I'm hoping that he can repeat the magic here today. So speaking of wise and sage things, we've already heard from 4 people this morning talking about tech culture in New Zealand, and I'm wondering if there was anything this morning that someone's mentioned that really stood out to you.
I'm holding a microphone, so I'll start. First of all, I don't remember volunteering, but good on me, good on previous me for getting in there. 2 things really stick out. Well, actually, maybe 3. One is that it's really exciting how your words can be turned into not always exactly what you said on the live captions. So I'm excited to see how that turns out. Katrina talked about meeting someone at the supermarket in a long, tedious queue that she'd rejected for roles a couple of times. And that resonated. I think I was talking to someone yesterday from the States about burning bridges. And you don't want to be burning bridges in New Zealand because you're going to see those people in the street, at a random party. I've heard a story about that today. You're going to see them everywhere. So, I think being human is important all of the time, not just, be nice in those high pressure situations, but you are going to see people. The other thing, and I'm not sure if I've internalized the pronunciation yet, but tuakana tēnā, that sort of 2-way mentor-student relationship. I remember back in the day talking about the smartest person in the room as though there was only ever going to be one, and they would be the singular smart person. And I just don't think that's the case at all. Everyone brings all sorts of smartness that they can learn from each other all the time. So that was Alicia, of course, who talked about that. So that's 3 things. Anyone else? Got to pick up your microphone.
Not so much from this morning, but just sitting here observing the audience as you piled in, and the crowd out there having lunch. What an incredibly diverse audience it is, and maybe it's a reflection of the content of the day and what's been presented and what's been talked about. But I'm one of those conference tragics. I go to a handful a year, and this level of diversity is not always present in a technology conference, so it's neat to see.
Oh, tēnā koutou katoa. I feel like I'm on this panel because I should have a sign around here, and a mugshot saying I'm sorry. During my time in the tech industry, which is pushing 40 years now, one measure of inclusivity and diversity is, of course, gender diversity. And it dropped from 30% when I first started in IT to around about below 15%, I think, and it's slowly creeping up again. So that's quite an interesting little matrix. From this morning, all I can say is, the first keynote, I loved it. I'll get my entire SLT to have a look at it. I think I'm really pleased that Alicia got to talk, because I think one of the things that's often missing from these discussions is Maori culture and what it brings to New Zealand, what our position as a sector is vis-a-vis Te Tiriti. And not only that, there's a lot of concepts and philosophies in Maori culture that make New Zealand, Aotearoa, a much stronger place. And you're talking about, what do we have to offer the world? It is often seeing problems from a different perspective. And that's something that I think is very unique to New Zealand. And that's an area in this sector that I think we've got a lot of work to do. How many people are going to the Matahiko Awards this evening? 2, right. So that's, 3, sorry. 3. So, that's the Maori annual Tech Awards, the inaugural Tech Awards. Massive event at Impororo, some amazing leaders. I believe Alicia's a finalist in one of the categories. So, yeah, it didn't sound like many people have heard about that, but hopefully by this time next year, we'll all be celebrating those awards.
I think, talking about that student mentor thing again, and always learning, and I think always being available to observe and listen and learn. I think there's a humility, and I realise as someone who grew up in New Zealand and who learnt some Māori, and back in my day, if you were in a certain type of class, you finished learning Māori at some point and went on to learn French, because that's clearly the language that you would want to learn if you were brought up in New Zealand. And so things have really changed, and I'm really grateful for that. And I don't know as much as I would like to, or as I should, but for culture, listening, being able to learn, and I'm trying to do some little things now, because you start from somewhere. My ultra marathon saying that I have is just like relentless forward progress, so one little step forward. So if I can say morena or atamarie in a channel of the morning, or I'm desperately trying to learn the days of the week, and that sometimes works, but I go back to that page quite a lot. So I can say harakaua rahini for Happy Monday, which is just, I don't know, my cute way of being able to greet the team. So that's so much more to learn, and I didn't know there was a Māori Tech Awards either, so that's good. I'm going to be looking out for that.
Both of you have been in the technology industry in New Zealand for quite some time. One of my observations of the technology sector in New Zealand, but like the healthcare sector, and it's one or two other sectors, there is a high level of ethnic diversity. Do you think that makes it more challenging or easier to have these conversations of inclusivity, diversity, incorporation of te tiriti? And where do you think that's sort of heading?
Did you expect questions to come from this side of, just this entire side of the room, Don?
It saves me from saying any prerogative.
I know, it's an incredibly sneaky tactic.
Shall I kick off?
Yeah, go on.
You're thinking. Okay, so for me personally, my background is that I was born and brought up in a country in Africa called Zambia. It's an amazing country. But my sister and I were the only Europeans at school. And we were very privileged, being, middle class in Africa is a very privileged position to be in. So working across ethnicities to me is just fun. You're learning all the time. And the biggest thing is to listen to people, I think.
And I think as technologists, we generally like new things, right? Who doesn't like a nice, shiny new piece of tech? And I think that applies to people as well, and new things. And I've spent time at a colleague's house celebrating Passover because he was Jewish. I knew nothing about that at all, and celebrating with food and drink. In fact, I'm always up for the food and drink experience to learn about new stuff. And fascinated about learning from people who'd come from working in India, and a much different approach to getting into work, doing your job, and perhaps waiting for work to come with you. Again, this isn't representative of everywhere in that large country, but like really different ways of working, and what a difference it was for them to come here. So, learning new tech, meeting new people, learning new stuff about their cultures is all super fun. Yeah.
Katrina presented a mixed perspective on whether that kind of working, hanging out with people that you work with beyond work as being a positive or a negative. And I mean, I guess it was just the accepted wisdom is that if you want to do good work, then you're supposed to hang out with each other, and you're supposed to all be, well, really, when I look back to when I started, you're all supposed to be bros who hung out and drink beer and all that kind of stuff. And then it's interesting the perspective of how that might exclude certain people. So firstly, generally speaking, do you think it's a positive thing? Do you think it benefits the work that we do if we do have those, I guess, extracurricular connections? And if it does, maybe what are some of the pitfalls to look out for?
Firstly, can I ask Rahul to answer his own question, and then he can move on.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do 2 for 1. one of the things that that occupies my mind in the middle of the night or early in the morning when I have spare time is to some extent, a culture is an accumulation of actions and practices and processes that you repeat on a regular basis at work and outside of work, and that becomes who you are and how you do, and that becomes the culture. And a lot of the stuff we do at work, to use Aaron's example of heading into work and looking at Jira board and looking at Excel and perhaps even when we talk about culture, we go to the go-to hero slide decks of Netflix and Spotify and Atlassian and Google. But where's Infosys? Where's Catalyst? Where's Datacom? Where's Xero? Where are those examples? And why don't we celebrate those? And why don't we know them very well? Or are they good enough to celebrate? They're all successful. So I think a little bit about that. I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but I think we do have an opportunity. I mean, diversity in a tech community, if you take a look at senior levels, there's not a heck of a lot of diversity, I think. If you look at the engineering level, the soldiers in the field, heck of a lot of diversity, particularly people like us, maybe without a beard. But there's certainly there's a lot of, I think, ethnic diversity in the technology community. But how do we make the most of that for the benefit of the business, of the organisation, or do we go all the multicultures and multicultures come together on a Jira board where the unity takes place, and we go about doing things in a certain way, or could we reinvent how we do things for the better? And where do we create space and time for that within our organisations and permission for that within organisations? So I haven't necessarily found an answer to that other than trying to do it in my own startups. But in a larger organisational sense, within your own teams, there's potentially an opportunity to explore. And I suspect, and the reason why I asked it to the two of you, is I suspect the Maori worldview, Te Maori, and more incorporation and inclusivity of that might give us a little bit of a permission set and an out within a New Zealand context to explore that. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm keen to learn more about that. To answer your question, ask it again.
Yeah, well, I actually don't like that question anymore. I might revisit it.
It was good.
Yeah, and I'll revisit it. I guess, well, maybe. But that's interesting. I've got another observation. I guess if you can ask questions, I can also make observations. That's the rules now. I think it's interesting that as companies we. Every company that I ever work with and interact with talks about wanting to be unique and wanting to be disruptive and wanting to be creative. And yet, then when we look for inspiration on how to work, it's like, okay, we need to install Azure DevOps and we need to use Microsoft Office and we need to adopt SAFe or some other scaled agile framework, and we need to do things like every other company. And it just seems like a real irony that we'll simultaneously want to be innovative and still want to do what everyone else is doing.
Okay, now I remember your first question. I'll hand off because that was easier than that one. No, look, I think, and I definitely know Don will have an opinion on what you just said. So I think, should you hang out after work, and should you socialise with your workmates? That was the gist of your first question, right? So I think everyone. Dan Pink, to go to things that we know, talks a little bit about what motivates people and motivates employees, and talks AMP, which is sort of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, as being things that really motivate people to give their very best. It's not just about incentivizing money and holiday pay and that sort of holidays and that sort of thing. It's a bit more than that. He thinks a little bit about what makes people work for free on the weekends, for their not-for-profits, for their sports club, for their musical band, whatever it might be, and give as much to that endeavour outside of work and not get paid for it, yet get a lot out of it and commit a lot of hours to it. Whereas at work, they get paid for it, they might get bonuses for it, and they give only the equal amount of effort or less effort. And so I think for me, when I think about your question about why would you want to hang out with your work colleagues other than they might be nice people, is I think everyone yearns for a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging. I think inclusivity as a set of action, inclusion is an action, right? It's not an end in of itself. It's things that you do, actions that you take to recognize the diversity that is prevalent around you and to make the most of that. And it leads to a sense of belonging amongst those who are in that particular group. And that sense of belonging is, I think, amplified or solidified, or you give it the opportunity to take hold if you spend more time together understanding each other as human beings, first and foremost, as opposed to human resources. And recognizing each other's backgrounds, perspectives, views on the world, what they observe and what you observe, and sharing that at a human level, as opposed to talking about the technical challenges of work. So I think it's useful in a lot of contexts for you to spend time with your work colleagues, understand them at a human level. You might find that problem solving might become easier. You might become more creative. You permit yourself to think further and deeper and more creatively as a team. And you empathize more with not just with your peers, but also you begin to understand the customer view, I think, a little bit closer and better as well. So you can be more innovative in your ideas.
Yeah, and I think you talked about belonging, and I think shared experiences do make belonging, and it's a bit of a different world now. And yeah, it might be meeting your colleagues and going for a drink, or do something fun online with the colleagues that you might not see all the time. I think that with that belonging and shared experiences are often as well not even the great ones. Like some of the people I meet up with, I worked with, say, 10 years ago, we remember the project, the terrible project that we sort of like complained about, and there were so many bad things, and that it weirdly has ended up united us, and we've always got that terrible project to talk about. But Katrina earlier today talked about culture fit and culture add, and I think if you're thinking of Venn diagrams, and we work in tech, so I know we all think in Venn diagrams a lot of the time. If the things where people are the same as each other or have that shared experience, that's a really cool sort of kernel, but it's the bits outside that on a very complex Venn diagram of all the other cool stuff we do, and take that picture as a whole is really amazing. But it does start from belonging, shared experience, and safety, because then you can do all the cool things that you talk about, experiment and innovate. Because you've got the safe environment in which to do it. Yeah.
You just mentioned the word safety. So what does a culture of safety look like? How do you create one? So why should you create a culture of safety? And how do you go about doing that?
I mean, I know that I'd like to experiment what I do and fail fast, and I absolutely do not pretend to know all of it all the time. And I want to be able to have people appreciate that. And as well, I'm in a leadership position now, and I think some role modelling and being up there, sometimes it feels like the most I can do. I'm not up to my elbows in the tech and doing the delivery of the stuff anymore. I was for a long time, but role modelling and get out there and maybe make some mistakes. And you know what? It's not the mistake you made; it's what you do next. So that's an important thing as well.
Yeah, gosh, where are we? Culture, meeting, safety. I think one of the things, so just stepping back a bit, I'm, what traditionally was thought of as a tech person. I'm of European origin, I'm male, I'm old, all those things, despite what the shirt might tell you. And so I come from a position that is relatively safe compared to younger people of different identities, genders, and so on, and ethnicities. So the best I can do is listen and learn, and enable those and then enable actions to take place to create those safer cultures. And one action might be actually, we've talked about coming together for drinks, but maybe coming together not for drinks, because alcohol is an unsafe medium, and that's something to recognise. One sort of protocol or tikanga that's been brought into Catalyst, which I think is a really helpful one is whakawhananatanga, which is basically about people sitting around, talking to each other and making connections, right? And as an introduction to a group of people, or a group of people that maybe don't meet together outside their normal workday. So you might have your stand-ups every morning, but you never talk about each other or talk about that special thing that identifies you to your peers. And that's an amazing, and most cultures have something like whakawhananatanga, to be fair, but bringing it in and doing it purposefully is a great way of making connections and understanding people and understanding maybe what will upset them or what will delight them. And you kind of want to end up in the delight thing. One of the downsides of being as passionate as we are at Catalyst is that sense of righteousness that comes with it. And you'll probably remember this. Aaron, you were the first QA person we ever employed. Can you imagine Aaron having to come into a bunch of know-it-all engineers and tell them that they'd buggered up?
Everything I learned about diplomacy, I learned at Catalyst.
I think, the safety is perhaps a relatively modern term for it, but I think about what gets measured and what gets modelled. When times are tough, and we were just talking before, Rachel, about it's a bit of a lean period for many companies, and it's a tough market out there. That's usually the first little canary in a coal mine for stopping to talk about culture and togetherness and safety and starting to focus on the balance sheet. And that's usually where the true values of a company or a team really come out, is when it's difficult times. Everyone kind of gets together and has wonderful hui when it's raining cash, but when it's hard and when the money's not coming in and you're all businesses needing to make money and profit, conversations like this are the first to go out the window. So I wonder if if there's a prevalence of whether we're engaging or participating in a system that is set up not to bring about the sort of world in which we're talking about here, that perhaps there's a change of system or thinking that is required at a more fundamental and basic level about how we do business and why we do business and what we are creating for what good and what exchange, value exchange, that either allows this sort of thinking to take hold in all times, whether it's tough times or easy times.
I think having that sense of mission and purpose is really key around that. And, is our mission to create wealth for ourselves or for shareholders or whatever? I mean, there's some of that. And again, I think Katrina talked about, earning enough to make us happy. I think for, working at Kogo, sustainability company, we exist to provide data and services so that we can... let me remember all the words, measure and understand and reduce carbon footprints, and do that via banks who can do that with their business and personal customers. And that is a fine purpose to have, which is fantastic. But off the back of that as well, that's why we turn up to work every day. We turn up to work with each other, and that's great. We've got that sense of purpose. But also we need to know that we're making that impact. So we're not there just to generate the wealth for whomever, but we need to see that impact that we want to create and see the results. And that's a really cool thing to sit within as a group of people. Yeah.
So it's funny you mentioned Don. Yeah, I was the first QA person at Catalyst, and one acronym I became very familiar with was RTFM. Which, if you're not aware, and hopefully you're not aware, is read the effing manual. And that was an acceptable sort of response to a question that someone less knowledgeable might ask. It was considered funny and socially acceptable. I haven't heard that phrase for yonks. So I wonder, how has technology changed? How has tech culture changed over time? And why do you think it's changed? Kind of quickly, because I haven't been in tech that long. 15 odd years, maybe it is long, I don't know.
There's a type of wisdom called, a teaching called implicit, and you sort of have to, that's not the right word, it'll come to me in a minute, but we actually have to sit with someone to learn something. So reading the manual is not going to be the thing that gives you the answers. But again, working today in quite a distributed world, and we've got quite a hub of people who work in New Zealand and also in the UK, so we've got a 12-hour time difference, which is the worst time difference to have when trying to work with people. And so actually manuals, not manuals per se, but trying to capture knowledge so that we can exchange it over a 12-hour time difference, that's actually come back into play because we're not all sitting there learning tips and tricks from each other in the room. So I don't know, it's a bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, manual isn't literal in this case. It basically is shorthand for go away and work it out yourself. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, this is something I was speaking about at an open source conference a few weeks ago. So there were 5 men started Catalyst. We were colleagues in a previous life, and we knew each other, trusted each other. And 5 blokes, right? What could possibly go wrong with that? And for a long time, for some reason, women didn't join Catalyst. And then when they did, there were more Andrews than women, and as far as we were concerned, we were doing nothing wrong. We were a meritocracy. This is where the RTFM comes from. And if there's one thing I've learned, that there's no bigger barrier you can put up to bringing people into your sector, into your business, into your group, than pretending that you're a meritocracy. That just doesn't exist. It's a way of excluding people. And one of the issues in the early days and going forward in our open source and internet communities is that we excluded people by using terminology like that, and by basically saying, go and work it out yourself. It was kind of supposed to be a bit of a test, I suppose. But it's a pretty crappy one.
Yeah,
I suppose, I mean, from me personally, the journey that you go on as you employ people and work with different people and get older is that you see the hurt that's caused to individuals, and the intention is never to cause hurt, quite frankly, and so you want to respond to that.
Thinking that, in leadership positions, being able to take a chance on someone. I remember I got into tech, having got some certificates, as I think Alicia called them earlier today. I've got a few certificates in music and performance music, and someone took a chance on me. I'd done a bit of tech stuff, but they took a chance just getting me in the door because they were really excited that I had some music on my CV, and that's where that began. And that was really cool that they looked outside the immediate culture fit into the culture ad, and that was a great turning point for all of us involved, I like to think.
So while you're thinking, traditionally, I think, you talk about meritocracy, I think it's a specific type of merit that was valued, and that is, well, how well can you code? And yet now we recognise that actually there are other kinds of merit as well. So you were valued for your music certificates, degrees, whatever it is that you had. And so I just wonder, so what benefits, so aside from the strictly technical merits, what is it that that non-technical backgrounds, how do they benefit tech culture and help people who maybe are doing the building and coding with what they're doing?
How does it help us make more money, Rachel? That's what I'm interested in as your boss.
Yeah, well, your audience is not technical, right, generally. So if you're trying to build systems for humans, you need humans to help you build it. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that, to develop, I don't know, an application that you expect 100% of humanity to use, and it's been written by, a small cabal of people that are not representative of humanity, then of course it's not going to appeal.
And I'm a big one for teams. I mean, I think we all are now, but it's not about the individual getting over the starting line. One of the things that my music degree has given me is a rich source of analogies, and I talk about other things too. But in a concert group, like a chamber group, you're playing with a small group of musicians. Everyone's got the chance to solo in that environment, and everyone has got the chance to support someone else. and it's really bad if one of you finishes first. And so you need to finish together. So those are things that I think really work for teams. So what I'm looking for, say in CVs, I want to know that people like working in teams, because I think that's so important. Or you know what, maybe they don't even know it's important yet, but they really embrace that idea, and that's what I think. And working in a team isn't something that you need to have a degree in tech to do. Yeah.
Cool. Rahul, do you have anything to add to that? It's okay if you don't. No.
Got any questions?
Okay, cool. So yes, actually, some really great questions here, and now's the time that my hands are so sweaty. Anyway. Yeah. Well, no. Okay, I won't go into that. Okay, what? Do you have any horror story? Like, okay, you've been around a long time, and many of you worked in a lot of different organisations. Tell me about like your tech culture horror stories.
Well,
Yeah, go on, Rahul.
Look, I mean, if you permit me to be philosophical for a little bit, and Aaron knows I'm philosophical all the time. He confuses that with wisdom, which is nice.
I'm easily confused. So we're great companions.
I'm a really curious person. I come from a family that doesn't live very long. On my dad's side, there are not many men who have lived beyond 50. So, you know, there's two that I know of, and one's still alive now, that's my uncle. But everyone else is, you know, life before 50. So my dad died when he was 45, his dad died when he was 49, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've only got a few more years left. That's my view, right? So I've known that for a long time. I'm very comfortable with it, right? I feel like, and so there's some amusing debates in society. You know, should we increase the retirement age from 65, 67? Heck, make it 77. I'm not here anyway. You know, but there's. But what that means for me is I permit myself to participate in challenges and difficult situations and difficult conversations because in my view, not only am I just living once, to a large extent I'm living half time. You know, I'm gone halfway through. So you know, I don't mind working in cultures which are really difficult because I think it grows me. But also there's a curiosity of participation that, you know, what's it like being in there, you know? And the only way to really understand how crap it actually is to get in rather than look at, you know, stand aside. But also you learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about how you interact, your own personal biases, your own personal prejudice. I've made plenty of mistakes. Don's aware of some of them. So that's why he passed it over to me. I've also learned a lot of stuff during that time, which I hope I'm able to sort of crystallize into some wisdom and do better than the second time around. I've got two boys, 6 and 3, and I've been thinking about my legacy for them, knowing that they're not going to be very old by the time I go. And I've given them sort of 5 rules to go by, and I think it's sort of applicable to how I sort of lead teams as well. So the first one is to be kind, the second one is to be honest, the third one is to be curious, the fourth one is to listen more than you talk. And I think for me, all of those things are really important. The fifth one is to be brave. So all of those things are really important in terms of how I lead teams and how I engage in difficult conversations, how I participate in difficult cultures. I just go back to those 5 rules. Everything else is just noise. And then lastly, I think a little bit also about what is, you know, so I come from a Hindu background. I'm not a practicing Hindu, but in Hinduism and Eastern philosophies, to some extent, your story is already pre-written. You're just living it out, and so for me, I have an innate sense of just getting closer to what that story actually is. I may not ever find out what it is, but I'm not going to stop myself from finding out. So I'm just going to say yes to stuff. I'm gonna permit myself to go into uncomfortable situations because, well, maybe that's what I was supposed to do anyway. And so, and I'm rambling. I'll stop in a second. But so the most important thing for me is in all those difficult circumstances is to find a way to elevate yourself out of the personal situation and immediate situation you find yourself in, and to look down from a bird's eye view as much as possible and understand the dynamics of the people, the culture, the environment, the purpose, and what really you need to get out of this outcome, get out of the situation, and be brave enough to get out of it and be honest and be kind to people within it, and move on.
Oh, I think we just.
I'd like to say, Rahul, as well, there's statistical outliers, right? So maybe I really hope that you'll be one of those, and that you, I don't know, then you're sad about the retirement age if it gets lifted to 77. I don't know. I think the reason why we probably paused a bit when you asked that question is because, like, where do you start with the technical horror stories? There could be a lot. And as you pointed out,
we started
decades
with contemplating our own mortality, and so, so we could just build on it from there. So go on.
I mean, you got the stories about the people in interviews that say, yeah, I think to get more women into technology, we need to make it more glamorous, and other, terrible stories. But what has been interesting about what we've all said here is about listening and learning and observing and all that. And I think that's absolutely what I'm going to take away. And someone today, Jay, talked about order and chaos, and I think so much of what we see is chaos around. Am I still good? Yes. So, chaos, whether it's political situations in countries, or the technology system that we have to hand, or the socio-technical system we have to hand to solve problems. And if that was all easy, we wouldn't be learning. And so maybe there's a risk-reward profile in there. Stuff is hard, be brave, go face into it, learn some stuff, make some mistakes, learn from those, and move on, and live a long time.
Cool. Don, do you have any horror stories you'd like to share? Or any more horror stories you'd like to share?
I'm very aware that I have colleagues and former colleagues in the room here. Actually, all of whom have really picked up the baton and taken leadership roles in trying to make Catalyst a company that has a good culture and be a good place to work. And it's a hell of a long journey. We're a long way from. I don't think there's ever an end point, but it's an ongoing journey, and it's enjoyable as well. Making a difference to people's lives is a good thing. Even though I personally forget that sometimes because I get annoyed and I'm a human and so on. There have been probably a couple of projects we've walked away from because the client culture has been incredibly toxic. And if there's one lesson I've learned from that, and it's still ongoing, because it's to try and protect people from that kind of interaction. We shouldn't allow our colleagues to be in those situations. It still happens because we're a services company, but that's an interesting one. I suppose the one that really changed my focus personally a bit was a few years ago. We had a colleague that was leaving, and they came to see me, and it was at a time when we were, as a company, we were doing quite a lot of te reo work. We had lessons for staff. We were going multilingual on our company website and so on. And this person who was leaving said, look, what you presented when I joined the company looked amazing. I was so looking forward to this company. But actually it's kaupapa, was just completely misaligned with those expectations that you'd set. Your values, your purpose were not expressed in a way that related to me as a Maori person. And that was an interesting serve and lesson, and something that hopefully we're still learning from. But again, I'm not the one to comment. It's for other people to say, have you progressed since then, Don?
Amazing. You've all mentioned at some point about making mistakes. What notable mistakes have you made? Missteps? with regards to culture.
I think that the biggest mistake you make as a leader, certainly for me, is this pressure you put on yourself to be right, or to make the right decisions. I think you got to recognise the humanity in yourself and just be such humility and say I don't know, or I need help, not just from just peer-to-peer support or mental health perspective, but definitely that, but also just that you may not have the technical capability or the leadership ability to get past this particular bump in the road, and not, just pressure to front as a leader the whole time and know what you're doing, what you're talking about. And I think to some extent you almost set yourself up for that failure by how you lead up to it all the months ahead of time or the weeks ahead of time, or always having the right answers, always holding the microphone and not being inclusive of other voices and diversity, and letting the people that are in your team be included in decision making and collective ownership of thinking. And so for me, one of the mistakes certainly I made early on is this pressure to have the idea, capital T, capital I, the answers, capital T, capital A, that I need to present as the leader, and expect everyone to sort of follow behind me. So that's definitely I think a red flag for me, and I'm very susceptible to it. And so it's one of the things I always sort of check myself on whenever I present in a certain way, is to sort of, ask questions and get other people talking first, so that I get a sense of, this is how you're presenting to me in this meeting and what you're thinking about on this topic.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thank you.
Something I think that's been said a few times today is beware of the cool books that you might read, like the Accelerates, the one about the whole Spotify model thing, and then you find out that Spotify themselves years later never actually implemented the Spotify model, but yet many companies thought, right, they did it and we'll take it on wholesale. These are great books with great ideas, often written in a different environment, an environment of different employment law, like say in the States. But there's cool stuff in there, but just look for that stuff, because if you take on a framework, the same could be said for many other frameworks, technical or, delivery focus that we've taken on, you've got to examine and go intentionally forward for good results, not because the book said so or because you can tick your way through it. So I may have made mistakes in that area. Maybe.
That was a good sort of swerve, wasn't it? Look, I don't think you can get to, older than Rahul is going to be, without looking back at your life and just cringing about, certain interactions you might have had, certain attitudes, certain views. If you don't, then you're a psychopath, would be my observation, really. Psychopaths don't look back with any regret. So, of course, there's a lot of stuff I regret. We moved to the UK and I ended up at a all-boys state high school. It was pretty big, a little bit unfriendly. It was at a time, being gay in the UK was legal, unlike in New Zealand. But it was a time there wasn't much sympathy for that. And I regret I didn't have a better understanding. And my parents were very open, very anti-racist and all sorts of things. And I'm sure if I'd have talked to them about it, I'd have been much quicker at appreciating just how, some of my teenage friends, when they came out, what a big deal that was at that time. Absolutely amazing. So I regret not having been more supportive. One of the things I think that we're learning more and more about today, particularly in our sector, is neurodiversity. And how, it's always been a feature of our sector, right? And it's a feature, not a bug. And being able to understand that, and actually also understand when we say, hey, we should all meet and get together and do a whakawhanautanga, that for some people that just doesn't work. So there have to be other ways of connecting and so on to people. And I think that's maybe a next step for us as a sector, and this again, this was talked about in the keynote this morning, or hinted at, that actually, being able to work from home and not suffer from, autistic burnout, or that whole stress of meeting lots of people and so on, and understanding the different ways our minds work and what that brings to our work and our outputs. I think that's really exciting.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. It's also a topic that, super passionate about. So we've got 5 minutes left, and in that 5 minutes, I'd like you all to offer an answer to this question, and that is, what is one thing that, because we've given our perspectives as leaders, right, and how leaders influence culture. If we're not necessarily leaders in terms of the job title we're given, because we're all leaders in our own ways, right? But in terms of what is something that we could all do tomorrow in our organisations that would have a positive impact on our culture, our working culture?
Okay. Easy one for me, because I say the same answer every time anyone asks me that. Not that I get asked this very often, but I've been waiting.
But it sounds like it's been more than once, though.
Look, most of you would have heard about this model of working during the week that Atlassian and Google made famous about, downing tools for 1 day in 5 and working on something creative that's in your mind and not driven by the corporate, and things like Gmail come out of that, and other things come out of that. But I want to offer you an alternative, right? So, which is within your groups, so within your circle of influence, the people that you are currently working with, team of 2, team of 20, whatever it might be, a little bit of time every week, just putting aside the Jira board and putting aside your sort of how you do what you do, and thinking and getting around a piece of paper or whiteboard, whatever works for you, and just reimagining what you do. So if we could start this again, if we could rework this from scratch about what we're actually trying to do here and who we actually exist for and what we're actually getting up to and how we actually work together based on who we actually are and based on what we know of each other. You're a mum, you're a father, you're a single parent, you're interested in music, you're someone that's worked extensively overseas, you're from a different culture, whatever it might be. Once we get to know each other, now that we kind of know each other, if we had to rework this, how we do what we do, what would we change? What's the one thing we can agree on this Friday that we'll try and experiment to do for the next 4 Fridays or Friday's time? And then we can revisit it, circle back around and go, did it work? Because that's the real way to, I think, to understand and be inclusive of the people that you're working with, to get the most out of each other, learn from each other, so that over time you can genuinely say, I worked with Aaron, Rachel, Don, or I didn't. What influence did they have on me, or did I just share my thoughts to them, they shared their thoughts with me, and we just moved on. So that human connection it's sitting right there as an opportunity, right in front of you, all around you at all times, and it's really up to you to just create that time and space to make the most of it.
Rachel.
There's a quote which is, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. It's something like that. And so I think for me it all comes down to being a role model, and every day we should be role modelling what we want to see. And I would include kindness, I'd include kind feedback, talking about the standard that we walk past. Let's not maybe walk past some of those standards. Let's have a conversation with someone about what we're seeing, because if you ignore a thing, you're accepting a thing. So, that just translates to role modelling every day, all the time. We're all leaders in different things in our own ways, and we can role model good stuff.
Don, it's your turn.
Wow, that's hard, isn't it, to follow both of those? It's a challenge. I mean, okay, so for me, if it's always about people. And my challenge to you, and I find this hard, so this is why I'm saying it's a challenge. Some people find it incredibly easy. Go and talk to somebody that you don't know, that you haven't spoken to. Or if you're in a company that, everyone does know everyone else, think about one thing that they might not know about you or your whakapapa or, whatever, and talk to them about that. Just do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you all taking your time to come and have this conversation with me and 280 of my closest friends. So thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our wonderful team.